And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed. To you it shall be for food. Genesis 1:29. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. Psalm 78:25. Everyday Manna with Lisa.
Hi everybody, and welcome to Everyday Manna. We have a very special program for you today, one that's very dear to my heart. For many, many years, my mother and I have canned tomatoes together every summer when, the canning tomatoes come in, and she always comes to my house and we can tomatoes. Well, this year, I decided that we would show you how we can tomatoes, and then we're going to use those tomatoes and we're going to make a wonderful beef cabbage soup, which is one of my all-time favorite soups. And alongside the beef cabbage soup, we're going to make some cheesy cornbread. What is better on a cold, blustery day than soup with warm, cheesy cornbread? So I'm going to show you now how my mom and I can tomatoes. All right, now what you see here is just the box of tomatoes. Now, we always can anywhere from 2 to 4 bushels because I use a lot of tomatoes. There's the beautiful little tomatoes that we're getting ready to can. Now, step one is always you put your jars, your clean jars, in about a 200-degree oven to sterilize them. You will see here I'm marking a little small X in the bottom of the tomatoes, and I'm dropping them into simmering water. What that does is loosen the skin off of the tomatoes so that you can peel them a whole lot easier. And this is a messy, messy job, but I just love it. We use so many canned tomatoes that we need to do it every year. But you wouldn't believe how much easier it is to peel a tomato once you just put a small X in the bottom. And as you can see, I'm lifting one out of here. Now you see that little split in the skin? That means that skin is just going to slip right off of that tomato. And I just kind of lift them out one at a time until I see that skin starting to split away. And then I take them out. I just use the lid of my pot to drain them. And I just take them out of the simmering water as they're ready. And it only takes literally about a minute. That's about it. Anywhere from, if you've got big tomatoes like that, then it takes about a minute in that water. You see how that skin just came right off? It just peels right off, and you have so much less waste than you would if you try to peel them with a knife. Now there's my mom, those are her hands, and we take them to the sink and we just literally just peel that skin right off, use a small paring knife and take the core out of the tomato and then put them in a pot. Now Mom has strong hands and she just squeezes hers. I'm not quite that strong. I have to cut mine. And here I am just peeling one, and you see how easy that skin comes off? That little trick is wonderful for tomatoes. It also works for peaches or any fruit that has a skin on it. If you just drop it in boiling water for just literally 30 seconds to a minute, it just comes right off. And I have to cut mine because my hands are not as strong as my mama. And I have enjoyed doing this with her for so many years. You just get your pots full of the tomatoes. If they're really juicy, you don't need to add any water. If they're not real juicy tomatoes, you might add about 1/4 of a cup of water just to keep them from sticking. You want to make sure that your tomatoes come to a rolling boil, as you can see here on the screen. You want to make sure that they're boiling really, really well. Your jars are hot. Take them out of the oven. I put 1 teaspoon of regular iodized salt. Now, this is one case I do use regular salt. I use just a funnel. There's Mom's. I'm the one putting the tomatoes in the jar, and we have this little assembly line going. And Mom and I have done this for years, and we do it every year, and I look forward to it. It's just a memory I have of being in the kitchen with my mom. We fill those jars with the tomatoes. As you can see, the jar's just getting full of the tomatoes, and those tomatoes are boiling hot. That jar is hot, so be careful. You have to make sure that your jars are hot. I do a 200-degree oven for about 20 minutes or just whenever I'm done. And I fill them up. You want to leave about a 1/2 inch head space at the top of your jar. Wipe the top, as you see Mom doing. She wipes the top of the jar clean. We put a lid on top. Now those lids that you saw me put on there have been in boiling water also. And I just keep a small pot beside where I'm working, and I put those lids in there and just boil those lids while I'm jarring up the tomatoes. Right there you go, as you see. That activates the seal. It gets that little rubber gasket on that lid ready to go. Mom just puts the lid on there and then screws down the top and takes a good towel there and just tightens that up and sets them to the side. And those are just some of the wonderful little tomatoes. And it's so funny because now, a lot of people process their tomatoes in a water bath. I don't do that because the tomatoes are boiling hot, the jars are hot, the lids are hot, and it seals automatically. And you hear it, it'll go, boop, and I always go. You can hear it literally pop when it seals. When it seals, the top of the lid, and I'll show you in just a moment, the top of the lid creates this vacuum down in the jar, and that keeps the tomatoes usable for many years to come. My mother and I have been doing that for years. And here is one of our jars that you saw us canning. This is what I'm talking about. You see the lid, and I always just put what year I do them. It just creates the heat, draws that down in, and there's a rubber seal on this piece that seals on that lid, and you can see I can't get it off. I'm going to have to use something to take that off. But these are the tomatoes that Mom and I canned this summer. I use, now for just me and my family, we use anywhere from 3 to 4 bushels of tomatoes in a year's time. I use them for so many different things. In a bushel of tomatoes, we get about 20 quarts. I can quarts, I also can pints. But I just thought you would want to see how we do things, and that's just one of the things that my mom and I do together. So many people have asked me, where did you learn to cook? Well, you saw her hands anyway on TV. I have been in the kitchen with my mother for as long as I can remember. I mean, when I was just, 3 and 4 years old, I was in the kitchen with Mom. My mom is an excellent cook. So I grew up in the kitchen with my mother, and I am to this day. I thoroughly enjoy being in the kitchen with her. And so with the tomatoes that we canned, we are going to make one of my favorite soups, which is a beef cabbage soup. If you've never had it, if you like cabbage, this is the dish for you. I can eat this whole pot of soup by myself. I love it. I'm going to get a big soup pot here, preheated to medium-high heat. I have 1 pound of really lean ground I'm using extra lean ground beef, which is like a 93.7 ground beef. If you want to use ground chuck, you can. You're just going to need to drain off your beef, the fat that drips out of your beef. If you use a leaner beef or a fattier beef than what I'm using. I just am using a very, very lean beef. I like the flavor of it in soups better, and it doesn't give off as much fat. And so I just put that in the bottom of my skillet, and I'm going to let that start browning. And when that gets good and brown, we're going to add some other delicious things to it. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, we're going to get this soup going, we're going to get the cornbread going, and then we're going to eat. I'll be right back with you in just a minute. Hey, and welcome back. Now we're going to start our soup. Well, we've already got it started. We've got our beef on the oven. Now, you've heard me say many times on this program that I'm not really a big fan of gadgets that really don't do a lot of things. Well, I have discovered one that I have to show to you. It's been around for a long time. I just never tried it. And I want to show it to you. And that is one of these little onion choppers. A lot of people really do not like to chop onions. Now, it doesn't bother me to chop them. I don't cry because I wear contact lenses. Now, if I have my glasses on, it does. So typically I just chop them by hand because it truly doesn't bother me. It has something to do with the contacts, I'm sure, covering my eye. But I found this little gadget here. One of the girls that works with me has used it before, and she was telling me about it one day, and I thought, why am I going to try that thing? You've seen them in the stores. They just open up. They have this little removable blade in there. But for those of you who don't like to chop onions, actually it works great for potatoes, for potato soup, or anything like that, but it's marketed, so to speak, for onions. Peel your onion, cut it in half, put your onion half down, take your little lid and press down, and boom, there you go. 2 seconds later, you've got chopped onions. And it really does work really well for onions. Look at that. It's done. You've got a little measuring thing in here, although I don't ever use that. But it comes apart real easy, dishwasher safe. Just one of those little gadgets that for those of you who don't like to chop onions, this is a great tool to have in your kitchen. I'm going to add my onions to my ground beef, and we're just going to kind of let those simmer. Let me get this put aside. We're going to let those kind of just hang out. That beef is going to get browned. Now, I am a person who eats soup year-round. A lot of people think it has to be cold weather. I disagree, because I really like soup year-round. It does not have to be cold for me. I eat soups and chilies all the time. But this particular soup, I don't know, when it starts getting a little bit of chill in the air and it's just those cold days, it just warms the bones, so to speak, and it's so delicious. One of my, if not my all-time favorite dish in the world is stuffed cabbage. Absolutely dearly love stuffed cabbage, and we're going to make that on this show one day. But it takes a long time to make that. It takes a long time to put it together and to simmer it. With this recipe, you're hitting kind of the same bells and whistles in your mouth, if you know what I mean. You're getting the same flavors, kind of as a stuffed cabbage dish. So if that's one of those things that you like, you will love this dish. To my meat, let's add a little bit of salt, about a teaspoon of salt, and some freshly ground pepper. And while that's browning up, I'm going to mix up our cornbread. And we're going to get our cornbread in the oven. I like a lot of pepper in this soup. I like a lot of pepper in everything. It's easy to make. You can do this any night of the week. If you get home at 6 o'clock, you can have dinner on the table in 30 to 40 minutes. So you could do this even on your busiest night. If you wanted to make this in the crock pot, you by all means could put this in the crock pot in the morning just like this. If you use the really lean ground beef, you wouldn't even need to brown the beef first. Put it in your crock pot, be gone all day. It's ready when you get home. I love it. It's one of my favorites. So while that's browning, let's get our cornbread mixture going. The first thing I want to do is mix my dry ingredients for my cornbread. I have 1 1/4 cups of just yellow cornmeal because I like yellow cornmeal. I think it looks prettier. I have about 3/4 cups of just plain white flour. I've got 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 3 tablespoons of sugar. I'm going to add, let me get my little measuring spoon here. I'm going to put 2.5, I'm keeping an eye on that, 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. You always want to make sure anytime you're baking that you do measure exact. 2.5 teaspoons of just fresh baking powder. Check your baking powder expiration date. If it's been in your pantry longer than 6 months, it's time to replace, because it will lose its ability to cause your things to rise. Stir all that together, or sift it if you have a sifter, would be fine, but just kind of stir all that together, set that to the side. Now let's get our wet ingredients. I have 1 cup of low-fat buttermilk. I like buttermilk in cornbread. If you don't want to use buttermilk, if you don't have any buttermilk, you can use regular milk. It's fine. It'll work just as well with milk as it does with the buttermilk. I have 1 egg that I'm going to beat lightly before I put it in my buttermilk. Just lightly, and then stir that into your buttermilk. Mix those two things together. And then slowly add your wet ingredients, a little bit at a time, in with your dry ingredients. You never want to just dump it all in there at one whack, because then your ingredients don't have a chance. And I need to get a different tool here. This whisk is not quite big enough to work on that. Let me grab another little stirrer here. But if you just kind of dump all your ingredients in there at one time, the flour molecules chemically don't have a chance to absorb as they should. So it's always a good idea to work it in batches here. And then we'll add the remaining part of our buttermilk. You've heard me say so many times, depending on the humidity of your day, when you're baking, you might need to add a little bit more or a little bit, less of the wet. If it's too wet, you can always add a little more, just maybe a tablespoon more of your cornmeal, but this is about perfect. Once you get it mixed, don't over-mix. Mix to the point that your dry ingredients are incorporated. We're going to add 1/3 cup of just shredded sharp cheddar cheese. You want to use the sharp cheddar because you want the flavor in the cornbread. Yum. Love cornbread. Absolutely love it. Now, I have got just a small baking dish. You all have these in your kitchen. I have sprayed it with spray. My oven is at 400 degrees. I'm going to put my cornbread mixture in my pan. I'm going to spread this out just lightly. Hear my soup simmering away over there. I'm going to put this in a 400-degree oven. It needs to bake for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we're going to have delicious cornbread. I'm going to take a quick break. I'm just going to stir my beef, get this in the oven. When I come back, we'll finish the soup up and we'll get the cornbread out of the oven. I'll be right back with you in just a minute. Hey, and welcome back. We forgot one key ingredient in our cornbread. I've got 2 tablespoons of butter that I have just melted in a small pot. We want to stir that butter in. We don't want to forget that delicious, yummy butter. So just take it, stir it in. Of course, you'd want to do this in your bowl, unless you're like me and you forget. It happens to you too. Don't laugh at me. How often have we gotten through a dish and realized we forgot to put something on there? So now we put it in the oven. We just put it in a 400-degree oven. Middle rack for about 20 minutes. Then it'll be good. It'll be delicious. So our browned beef is ready. There's absolutely no fat in the bottom of this skillet. I have 1 box of beef stock or beef broth that I'm going to add to our soup. Looks good already. I have 1 can of dark red kidney beans. I like the dark red. You can use the light red if you want to. I like the dark red. Full of fiber and nutrients. Beans are one of the healthiest things you can eat. And my pantry is always full of different kinds of canned bean products. They're just so convenient to use. Now, at home, I've got my little flip topper thing, and I don't have one here, so let's see if I can get the top off of these tomatoes. Oh, did you hear that? That little whoop, that means that was sealed. One thing with your home canned tomatoes, let me point out one thing. These, of course, are not bad or spoiled because number one, you can tell by looking at them, but also you can tell by smelling the fresh, summery tomato smell. But if they start separating, it's okay. The water sometimes will separate. But if it gets an off color or an off smell, by all means, you would not want to use those. But I can say, in all the years I've been canning tomatoes, and I've been canning tomatoes now for, goodness, 20 years probably, I think I've had one jar go bad on me in all that time. And you know what? I did not pick a big enough soup pot. That's not going to work in that pot. We're going to have to transfer that. But that's okay. We will do that in just a second. I've got one head of cabbage that I've just washed, and I'm going to chop up, cut it in half, and then in quarters. And you've seen me do this before. Cut your core out. Just do it on an angle. It takes that core right out. Same thing on this side. Cut the core out. And then however you like it. I like bigger chunks of cabbage. If you want to shred it fine, you can do that. I like to have a piece about like that I know I'm eating cabbage. So I just slice it like that in about 1-inch pieces and then go back, and I've got little pieces about 1 inch in length. About like that is how I like mine. If you like yours a little more fine, then just, that's okay. I'm just going to keep chopping this cabbage up, and I'm going to have to put that in a different soup pot. And then we will eat. Alrighty, now we're just chopping up the rest of our cabbage. I put my soup, I left you for just a minute, and put my soup in a bigger pot because I ran out of room. And I do that all the time. I think, well, that'll be a big enough pot. Then I start making soup, especially with soup, and I run out of room. So we just put that in my big pasta pot. It worked just fine. Absolutely perfect. Like I said, you can do your cabbage however you like it. If you like it, finer shreds, you can do it that way. However, I like to see what I'm eating. I like to know that it's big chunks of cabbage, and I like to separate. That's what I'm doing here. Sometimes, cabbage especially can get real compact in the head. This is a wonderful head of cabbage. I've been sneaking bites. And it gets, tightly compacted in there. And so I like to separate out my leaves just a little bit. And I use a whole head of cabbage because I really, really like cabbage. But if you don't want to use that much, you don't have to. You can use half a head. Depends on the size of your cabbage. We will start out putting about half of that in here. Stir that up. Let's see where we are. Can you see down in my pot? Yum, yum. Look how good that looks. See how that just, Now, if you think you need to add a little more beef broth, absolutely you can add water, a little more water, or some extra stock in there if you want your soup soupier. With this particular soup, I like it to kind of be really a thick, dense, heartier soup. Whereas like a minestrone, I like a little more brothy. You can use your judgment there, however you like it. If you want to maybe feed a few more people, or maybe you want it a little more soupy, then by all means you can add some extra beef broth or even some water at this point, because you've got 1 quart of the beef stock in there. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. Now, I know that looks like a lot of cabbage, and it is, but you got to remember that cabbage is going to cook down. It's going to wilt down just a little bit. So put your heat on like medium heat or so. Cover this pot. Let this simmer for about 20 minutes, and then your soup will be delicious. It's an easy, easy soup to fix. All right, now our cornbread is done. And all I did was let it cool for just a minute, and then I cut it into little squares here. As you can see, I've got just the little small pieces of cornbread, about, I don't know, 1.5-inch squares. of just little cornbread, and I've already sampled it. It's so good. You could slather you a little bit of butter on that. So there's our cornbread. Our soup is done. Look at this wonderful bowl of delicious soup. We're just going to put some in our bowl here. Oh, look at that, how good that looks. I so wish that we had smell-o-vision, because you would dearly love the smell of this dish. Now, like I said, I like mine chocked full of the veggies. And there's our wonderful little beef cabbage soup that we made with some very lean ground beef and onion, my home canned, a quart of my home canned tomatoes, some beef stock, a can of kidney beans, a little bit of salt and pepper to simmer it together. It's absolutely delicious, alongside with our wonderful cheddar cheesy cornbread. I do hope that you will try these recipes. Get into the kitchen with your mom. Make those memories like I showed you earlier of me and my mom canning our tomatoes. That's a memory that I will cherish until the day I die. And do get in the kitchen with your family. Bring your kids. You see my kids on the program with me all the time. There's a reason for that. It's making memories with your family. And who knows what they might grow up to be. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time on Everyday Manna.
Thank you for watching Everyday Manna with Lisa. This program is made possible by viewers like you. Your support is continually needed to keep Christian programming on the air. Please send your best financial gift to Living Faith Television in care of Everyday Manna, P.O. Box 1867.